believed my marriage was a sanctuary, a place where love, respect, and honesty lived. I thought we were unbreakable, two souls intertwined against the world. But sometimes, the cracks are invisible until they swallow everything whole. This is a story about discovering betrayal not in loud confrontations but in silence, in half-truths, and the hardest journey of learning to stand again when the one you trusted most becomes a stranger. If you ever felt your world crumble quietly around you, this story will resonate with your deepest fears and the hope for renewal. Part 1. I still remember the first time I realized something was wrong, but I didn't want to admit it. It was one of those ordinary evenings, the kind you'd barely notice if you weren't paying attention. The dinner was simple, the conversation light, but there was a flicker in his eyes, a hesitation, a quick glance away that lasted just a second too long. 4 weeks. I brushed it off. Maybe he was tired from work, stressed about a project, or just distracted. We'd been together for nearly 8 years, married for 5. Our love was supposed to be steady, a rock in the shifting tides of life. But that night planted a seed of doubt, a whisper at the back of my mind that refused to be silenced. I began noticing the subtle changes, his phone always face down, a secretive smile when he thought I wasn't looking, excuses to stay late at the office that didn't quite add up. At first, I wanted to believe in him, to trust the man who promised forever, but the more I tried to ignore it, the louder the silence between us grew. One afternoon, while he was out, I found his phone unlocked. A pang of guilt hit me instantly. Privacy was sacred, but my heart was breaking in ways I couldn't understand. I told myself it was just to ease the gnawing anxiety inside me. What I saw shattered everything. Messages, not just friendly chats, but intimate words, plans to meet, photos hidden in private albums. The woman was someone I didn't know, someone who wasn't supposed to exist in our world. I read and reread the conversations, the betrayal sinking like ice through my veins. How could he live a double life, sharing his laughter, his bed, and his future with someone else while standing beside me every day? That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my mind a storm of pain and disbelief. How long had this been going on? Was any of it real? Did he ever love me at all? The man I thought I knew was a stranger, a ghost haunting the life we built together, and I was left holding the pieces of a heart I wasn't sure could ever be whole again. But as dawn broke, a quiet resolve began to form inside me. I couldn't stay trapped in the shadows of his lies. I had to find myself again, beyond the pain, beyond the broken promises. This was only the beginning. Part 2. The morning after my discovery was the hardest dawn I'd ever faced. The sun poured through the window, indifferent to the storm raging inside me. I forced myself out of bed, tried to move like any normal day. But my world was anything but normal. Every step felt like walking on shards of glass, and the weight of betrayal crushed my chest. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I replayed every moment of our life together, searching for clues I'd missed. The dinners where he seemed distracted, the late nights that became more frequent, the phone always hidden from view. It all made sense now, but understanding didn't soften the blow. I didn't tell him I knew. I wasn't ready for confrontation. Not yet. Instead, I sank into myself, trying to figure out who I was without the man I loved. It was like waking up from a dream and realizing the world you thought was real was just an illusion. Days passed in a blur of forced smiles and stolen tears. I went to work, answered emails, and played the role of the composed wife while my heart shattered behind closed doors. At night, I would lie awake, haunted by their conversations, the secret plans, the shared jokes, the promises made to someone else. Friends asked if everything was okay, but how could I tell them? How could I admit that the person I trusted most was the one who hurt me the deepest? I felt isolated, trapped in a nightmare where I was both the victim and the fool. And then came the moments that cut the deepest, when he'd come home late, smelling different, distracted, like a man carrying a secret too heavy to share. I watched him closely, trying to find the man I married beneath the layers of deceit. But each glance only revealed more distance, more silence. One evening, I found myself standing by the window, watching the world move on without me. I realized that I had two choices: let this betrayal define me, destroy me from the inside out, or fight back. Fight for my dignity, for the truth, for the future I still wanted to believe in, even if it wasn't with him. But fighting meant facing the pain head-on. It meant tearing down the walls I'd built around my heart and facing the unbearable reality that the man I loved was no longer mine. The next few weeks were a fragile dance, pretending, hiding, watching, waiting. I started keeping a journal, pouring my thoughts and fears onto the pages. Writing became my lifeline, the only way to process the chaos inside me. I asked myself the hardest questions. Was I enough? Was our love ever real? How could someone I trusted so completely turn into a stranger overnight? The answers didn't come easily. Sometimes, I caught glimpses of the man I married in his laughter, in his touches, but those moments were fleeting, overshadowed by the growing chasm between us. One night, I confronted him, not with anger or tears, but with quiet strength. I told him I knew. I told him I saw the other woman in his phone, in his excuses, in his eyes. For the first time, he didn't deny it. He didn't make promises or excuses. He just looked away, defeated. That silence spoke louder than any words. It was the end of the illusion. But endings are also beginnings. As painful as it was, that night marked the moment I started reclaiming my life. It wasn't immediate, and it wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I was no longer a victim of his betrayal. I was a woman who still had a voice, a future, and the strength to build something new, even if it was from the ashes of what once was. And so, I began the long, winding path of healing, a journey that would test every ounce of my courage and force me to rediscover who I truly was. Part 3. After that confrontation, the house felt colder, heavier, a hollow shell of what it had once been. I woke up each morning feeling like I was carrying a secret too heavy for my shoulders, a secret that threatened to swallow me whole. The man I once trusted to be my partner, my confidant, was now a stranger who shared my bed but not my soul. The days blurred into a painful routine. I went through motions I barely understood, making breakfast, packing lunches, pretending everything was fine. But beneath the surface, my heart fractured more with each passing hour. I found myself questioning everything, not just him, but me. Was I blind? Was I naive? Did I deserve this? In the quiet moments, when the world wasn't watching, the pain hit hardest. Sometimes I'd break down, alone in the bathroom, tears falling silently, grief flooding my veins. Other times, anger surged through me, hot, wild, impossible to control. I hated him, but I hated myself even more for letting this happen. The hardest part was the loneliness, not the absence of people around me, but the feeling that no one truly understood what I was going through. Friends offered their sympathies, but their words felt hollow. Family tried to help, but I could see the worry in their eyes, as if I were fragile glass about to shatter. I withdrew into myself, closing off from the world that seemed too bright and too painful at the same time. Work became my refuge, the only place where I could lose myself in tasks and deadlines, ignoring the chaos waiting at home. At night, I lay awake, haunted by memories, the laughter we shared, the promises we made, the future we planned. How could all of that have been a lie? Was any of it real, or just a beautiful story I told myself to feel safe? One evening, as I sat alone in the dark living room, my phone buzzed. It was a message from him. Simple, cold, we need to talk. My heart pounded, but I knew I couldn't avoid this forever. I agreed, even though every part of me screamed to run away. We met at a small cafe, far from the place where our lives had fallen apart. He looked tired, older somehow, like the weight of guilt was etched into every line of his face. For the first time, I saw the man behind the mask, flawed, scared, lost. He spoke quietly, telling me about the loneliness he felt, the doubts that crept in, and how it led him to make choices that broke us both. I listened, trying to understand without losing myself. It was painful, hearing the truth, but also necessary. I realized that while he betrayed me, he was also trapped in his own web of regret and confusion. That conversation didn't fix everything, far from it, but it marked the beginning of something new, honesty, raw, uncomfortable honesty that would be the foundation of whatever came next, whether together or apart. As I walked home that night, the city lights blurred through my tears. I didn't have answers, but I had clarity. This was not the end of my story. It was just a new chapter, one where I had to find my own strength, my own voice. And for the first time in a long while, I believed I could. Part 4. The days after that cafe meeting were the hardest I'd ever faced. I kept replaying every word he said, every glance, every pause. There was an unbearable weight in knowing the truth but still feeling lost in how to move forward. The silence between us at home was deafening. We shared the same space but lived in separate worlds. I remember one morning vividly. The house was still asleep, sunlight creeping through the curtains, soft and golden. I sat alone at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a cold mug of coffee, staring out the window as if the answer might be hiding in the quiet streets. Our daughter was asleep in her crib, unaware of the storm raging in her parents' lives. For a long time, I just sat there, listening to the ticking clock and my own breathing. Part of me wanted to scream, to shout at the injustice of it all. Another part wanted to curl up and disappear. But what I felt most was a deep, aching sadness, the loss not just of trust, but of the future we had promised each other. The memory of his betrayal haunted me relentlessly. I found myself scrutinizing every detail of our life together. The late nights he said he spent at work. The phone calls he took in hushed tones. The way he'd sometimes look at me with a shadow of guilt or fear lurking behind his eyes. I wondered how I hadn't seen the signs earlier. Or if I had, why I had chosen to ignore them, blinded by love and hope. At work, I was distant, distracted. My colleagues noticed, but I brushed off their concerns. How could I explain the fracture in my life to anyone? This was a pain I had to carry alone, a secret that felt like it could consume me whole. One evening, I sat with a journal, something I hadn't done since college. I started to write, pouring out the tangled mess of emotions I couldn't say out loud. Anger, hurt, confusion, fear. I wrote about the moments I felt betrayed, about the nights I cried silently so no one would hear, about the desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, things could still be okay. Writing didn't fix the pain, but it gave me a lifeline. It was a way to release the chaos inside, to start untangling the knot of betrayal and love. I realized that healing wouldn't come overnight, it would be a slow, painful process, like trying to find solid ground in a world that kept shifting beneath my feet. Meanwhile, my husband tried to make amends. He was awkward and unsure, sometimes desperate, sometimes distant. We attempted conversations that ended in tears or silence. He wanted forgiveness, I wanted answers. We were both lost in the wreckage of what we once were. Our daughter became the fragile thread holding us together. Her innocent laughter, her tiny hands grasping mine, these moments were a bittersweet reminder of what was at stake. I wanted to protect her from the pain, but I knew I had to find strength not just for me, but for her. One afternoon, as I watched her play, I made a silent promise. No matter how broken I felt, I would rise. I owed her a future where love meant safety, honesty, and respect, even if that meant rebuilding from the ruins of a shattered marriage. That night, I confronted him again. Not with anger, but with a weary clarity. I told him I needed time, space, and honesty, not empty promises or half-truths. He nodded, understanding the gravity of what lay ahead. This wasn't just about forgiveness. It was about survival. About learning to live with the pain without letting it define me. About reclaiming my life from the shadow of betrayal and finding a path forward, step by difficult step. The road was long, the nights often sleepless. But somewhere deep inside, a small spark of hope flickered, fragile, but real. And I knew that no matter how dark the night, dawn would come. Part 5. The days after my confrontation with him blurred into a strange limbo where nothing felt solid or real. We were living under the same roof, but as strangers navigating the ruins of what had once been love. Every glance, every word carried the weight of what had been broken and what was still uncertain. I began attending therapy, something I'd resisted before, sitting in that quiet room with a stranger, pouring out the raw pain I'd bottled up for months, was both terrifying and relieving. I had always been the strong one, the pillar for others, but now I was finally admitting that I was fragile, shattered even. The therapist's words were gentle but firm, guiding me to understand that healing was a journey with no shortcuts. I told her about the man I thought I knew, kind, loyal, steady, and the man who had become a stranger in our bed. I talked about the nights I stayed awake, wondering if I was enough, if I had missed signs, if I was somehow to blame. She told me that betrayal was never the fault of the one betrayed. Those words were a balm I didn't realize I desperately needed. At home, the atmosphere was heavy with unspoken regrets. He tried to reach out, but there was a new barrier between us, one I wasn't sure I could cross yet. His apologies were sincere, but they could never erase the images that haunted me, the texts, the hidden meetings, the quiet lies that filled the spaces between us. Our daughter, oblivious to the tension, continued to be a bright light. Her laughter was the soundtrack I clung to in the darkest moments. I found myself becoming fiercely protective of her, determined to shield her from the pain even if I couldn't shield myself. Slowly, I began to rediscover parts of myself I'd lost in the shadow of betrayal. I took long walks alone, breathed in the crisp air, and let my mind wander to places beyond heartbreak. I reconnected with old friends and found solace in their support. I poured myself into work, channeling my energy into something productive. Every small step felt like a victory. But the hardest moments were still the quiet ones, the ones when the house was still, and the silence pressed down like a weight. I'd catch myself reaching for my phone, tempted to check his messages or social media, searching for signs or answers. I knew it was a dangerous trap, but the urge was relentless. One evening, he came to me with a small box, a simple gesture, but one loaded with meaning. Inside was a necklace, delicate and understated. He said it was for me, a symbol of his commitment to change, to transparency, to trying to rebuild what he had broken. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe in us. But trust, once shattered, is not easily repaired. I kept the necklace but didn't wear it. It was a reminder of what could be, but also of what had been lost. I realized that forgiveness wasn't a single act, it was a process, a series of choices I would have to make every day. Sometimes, I would feel the warmth of hope, other times, the cold sting of doubt. In those moments, I clung to a truth that the therapist had told me: healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means learning to live with the pain and finding strength despite it. It means building a new life, whether that meant rebuilding together or moving apart. As the weeks turned into months, I felt the slow, steady pulse of resilience growing inside me. I wasn't the same woman who had walked into that hospital months ago, full of hope and blind trust. I was stronger, scarred, but alive, ready to face whatever came next, for myself and for my daughter. And though the future was uncertain, one thing was clear: I would no longer let betrayal define me. Part 6. The fragile peace that had settled over our home was deceptive, a thin veneer masking the tension simmering just beneath the surface. I learned quickly that healing wasn't a straight path, it twisted and turned, sometimes pulling me forward, sometimes dragging me back into despair. Some days, I woke up feeling lighter, as if the nightmare had loosened its grip, only to have it slam down on me again by evening. Other days, I'd find myself laughing with my daughter, feeling hope bloom in my chest, only to have a stray memory or a passing glance from him shatter that fragile joy. He was trying, truly trying, to be present. He went to counseling himself, trying to understand why he had broken our vows, why he had allowed himself to stray so far from the man I thought I married. I watched him wrestle with guilt, with regret, with a desperate need for redemption. But remorse alone wasn't enough to heal what was broken inside me. I kept asking myself the same question: could I ever trust him again? And more terrifying, if I could, should I? There were moments when I saw glimpses of the man I once loved, the man who had promised forever, but those moments were fleeting, overshadowed by the pain and doubt. I felt like I was living two lives, the one I wanted and the one I had. One afternoon, while my daughter napped, I sat alone in the living room, flipping through an old photo album. The images stared back at me: our wedding day, smiling faces, dreams captured in frozen time. The memory of our vows haunted me, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for better or worse. Had those words meant anything to him, to me? My phone buzzed, breaking the silence. It was a message from him: can we talk? I want to be honest, no more lies. My heart raced, uncertainty flooding every cell. Part of me longed for clarity, for a chance to understand everything, but another part feared the truth would hurt even more. I replied simply, okay, tonight. That evening, after putting our daughter to bed, we sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the same table where we had shared countless meals, dreams, and quiet moments. Now it was the stage for a reckoning. He took a deep breath and began to speak, his voice shaking. He told me about the doubts, the loneliness he felt, the way the affair started almost like an escape, a way to feel alive again. He admitted how wrong he was, how he never meant to hurt me, but the damage was done. Listening to him, my anger flared alongside the pain. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, to unravel every lie, but I stayed silent, because in that moment, I realized that this wasn't just about him or me, it was about the life we had created and the family we wanted to protect. We talked for hours, laying everything bare, no more secrets, no more half-truths. And for the first time since the betrayal, I felt a small flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long time, hope. But hope was fragile, and I knew the road ahead would be long and difficult. We had to rebuild not just our marriage, but our trust, our communication, and our commitment, and I had to learn to forgive, not just him, but myself for staying in a love that had betrayed me. The next morning, as sunlight poured through the windows, I looked at my daughter sleeping peacefully in her crib. I knew that whatever happened between me and him, I had to be strong for her, for myself, and for the future I still believed I could create. Because sometimes, even in the darkest storms, there is a chance for healing. Part 7. Days turned into weeks, and the rhythm of our lives shifted into an uneasy new normal. The air in the house felt different, heavier, yet somehow more honest. We were no longer pretending everything was fine, but the truth had opened wounds that needed time to heal. I wasn't sure if the pieces could ever fit together perfectly again, but I was beginning to see the shape of something new forming. I started attending therapy on my own, desperate to make sense of the storm inside me. The counselor's office became a sanctuary where I could unravel my tangled emotions, grief, anger, confusion, and the fragile threads of hope I clung to. I learned that healing wasn't about forgetting or excusing the betrayal. It was about reclaiming my own sense of self, piece by piece. At home, we tried to rebuild our connection slowly. The conversations that once flowed freely had become cautious and deliberate. He was patient, understanding that my trust couldn't be rushed or demanded. I was learning to listen again, not just to his words but to the way his actions matched, or didn't match, his promises. One evening, as I was putting our daughter to bed, he quietly joined me. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice soft but earnest. I nodded, heart pounding with a mixture of hope and fear. We sat down in the living room, the silence between us filled with unspoken questions. Then he said something that surprised me. "I know I broke us, but I want to understand what you need, not what I think you need, but what you really need to feel safe again." It wasn't a grand gesture, but it was a start. For the first time, I felt like I had a voice in this fragile process. I told him about the nights I woke up, heart racing, haunted by memories. I told him about the moments I felt invisible, like I was a ghost in my own life. I told him I needed honesty, patience, and respect. He listened, really listened, and in that moment, the walls I'd built around my heart began to crack. But even as we made progress, the past loomed. I found myself battling jealousy and doubt when I thought about the other woman. I struggled with the fear that the betrayal might happen again. That trust was a fragile thread that could snap without warning. To cope, I poured my energy into our daughter. She was my anchor, my reason to fight for a future beyond pain. Watching her grow, seeing her smile, made me believe that healing was possible, not just for me, but for all of us. One afternoon, I caught a glimpse of him playing with our daughter in the park. The way he laughed with her, the tenderness in his eyes, it reminded me of why I fell in love with him in the first place. That memory was a lifeline when the storm threatened to pull me under again. Yet, the road ahead was uncertain. We both knew the journey would be long and fraught with challenges. But for the first time since the betrayal, I believed we might find our way through the darkness, together, but also as individuals who had been broken and were learning to be whole again. And as I watched our daughter chase butterflies in the late afternoon sun, I promised myself that no matter what, I would never lose sight of who I was, a woman who had survived heartbreak, reclaimed her strength, and was ready to face whatever came next. Part 8. Months passed, and the seasons changed, carrying with them the quiet transformations inside our fractured family. The rawness of betrayal had dulled, not erased, but softened into something bearable. Healing, I realized, wasn't a straight path but a jagged one, with steps forward and slips back. Still, Each day I woke with a little more strength, a little more hope. He kept his promises. No more lies. No more secret phone calls or unexplained absences. Instead, there was effort, sometimes clumsy, sometimes hesitant, but genuine. He attended counseling with me, and though the sessions stirred uncomfortable truths, they also opened doors for understanding we never thought possible. We talked about everything: the affair, the pain, the reasons that led us there. It wasn't easy, it wasn't neat, but it was necessary. One evening, after a particularly difficult session, we sat together on the couch. I looked at him, the man who had shattered my world, and saw not just the one who hurt me, but someone broken too, trying to find his way back. "I want to rebuild us," he said quietly, "but I know it's up to you. I'll wait. I'll fight for us if you want me to." I swallowed the lump in my throat. The choice was mine, to hold on to the wreckage or to start again, knowing things would never be the same but believing they could be better. I chose to try. We started with small things: shared dinners without distractions, walks in the park holding hands, late-night talks about our dreams and fears. Trust was still fragile, a tender shoot in harsh soil, but it grew with nurturing and time. I learned to forgive, not to forget, but to free myself from the bitterness that threatened to consume me. Forgiveness was for me, not for him. It was my way of reclaiming peace. Our daughter, blissfully unaware of the storm we had weathered, thrived in the warmth of two parents learning to be whole again. Watching her laugh and grow gave me purpose beyond the pain. Yet, beneath the surface, scars remained. Sometimes, a flash of doubt would creep in, or a shadow of anger would stir. But those moments were fleeting, reminders of our journey rather than chains binding us. I realized that love, after betrayal, was not about perfection. It was about courage, the courage to face the truth, the courage to be vulnerable, and the courage to choose hope when despair seemed easier. This story isn't just about heartbreak or betrayal. It's about survival, about finding strength in the ruins, and about the messy, beautiful process of healing. I don't know what the future holds, but today, I stand taller, stronger, and more certain of one thing: I am enough, and I will never let anyone else's choices define my worth again. This is my story, a story of pain, of loss, but most importantly, of the fierce resilience that comes when you refuse to be broken.